With all the ships that vanished utterly in the ocean that we've covered, vessels lost forever to those dark depths where anything could be, are y'all afraid of the ocean yet? No? Well, you're about to be because we're talking real-life sea monsters, things that did lurk in those unknown depths and came to the surface. Sometimes, mysterious animals wash ashore and baffle people, or reveal themselves as strange noises picked up on hydrophones that baffle and terrify us. We've talked a lot on here about things that vanished into the ocean, but today we are looking at the weird, mysterious things it spat out. That's right, globsters. The weird sea monster looking carcasses that get spat out of the ocean, rarely resembling known animals in any way at all. And people like to use these, and other examples, as proof of unknown animals or once extinct animals still living, when in reality they can be explained. Often, in fact, the answers aren't very alien at all, despite the mystery that first pulled us into the sea appearing very much to be. Today we'll get up close and personal with some of these cryptids and go over what they in fact really are. But first, what is a globster? Well, I'm glad you asked. A globster is an unidentified blob of organic mass, or the remains of an ocean animal that washes ashore. Okay, with that simple definition in mind, let's get to it and start with one of my favorites, the Stronsay Beast. This beast has the honor of being perhaps the very first recorded globster in history, at least modern recorded history anyway. The Stronsay Beast washed ashore in, guess where? Stronsay Island in the Orkney Islands, part of the Northern Isles of Scotland, on September 25th, 1808. What people found when they came down to the beach that day was a massive, dead, unidentifiable carcass of an ocean animal not resembling anything known to science at the time or even now. The massive carcass reported was very long and thin, serpent-like almost, as you can see from the pictures, with 3 sets of legs, and it measured around 55 feet long. That's 16.8 meters for everyone outside of America. This description paints a vivid image and makes this globster become one of the most interesting in my opinion. Again, it doesn't sound like anything that exists today or existed anytime in prehistory. Honestly, it almost sounds how I'd expect 65 would have depicted a plesiosaur given how faithful to the other animals they depicted were. The Stronsay Beast overall gives me Loch Ness Monster vibes, even though this long predates the modern Loch Ness Monster legends. The corpse was first spotted by a fisherman before it washed ashore, who noted the circling seabirds and he saw the massive animal lying on its belly from a distance. 10 days later was when it washed ashore and the same people, and 2 others who had no recorded names, came back to take another look. Other details of the carcass included it being 4 feet wide, being covered in a filament-like furry coating. At the end of each of the 6 legs was a paw or wing, the end of the tail was also missing, and the skin was smooth to the touch. Whatever was in its stomach was also red. It also had a row of bristle-like spines going down the back, now making me think of the hybrid dinosaur version too, from my own original writing. Cool. The spikes were also described by some eyewitnesses as having bioluminescent properties when in the dark. Okay, so we have a description of the beast, from which the 2 depictions you see on screen were drawn. We can cover what happened next now. Scottish naturalist Patrick Neal was so impressed with the Stronsay Beast that he designated it with its own scientific name. This abomination of a word you see on screen now that I will now both try to pronounce and simultaneously butcher. Halcydrus papatoni, I don't know. Only 4 people saw the actual carcass before it rotted away, and none of them were scientists, and photography was not even a thing yet, so no pictures exist unfortunately. But a few pieces of it were salvaged. They were given to proper scientists and quickly found to be cartilaginous, like sharks. It was also found that the legs were in fact fins. Going off this, scientists quickly deduced that the animal was likely a heavily decomposed basking shark. One whose size was either much larger than an average individual or was simply mismeasured by the amateurs. It is also believed that the long neck was the result of the gills and bottom jaw sections falling off. As you will see later, this does result in the illusion of a long neck and small head. In 1849, Scottish professor John Goodsir in Edinburgh came to the same conclusion that the corpse was a basking shark. Surviving bones, like a few vertebrae, available for study today, also lead modern scientists to the same conclusion, that the beast was merely a basking shark. Eyewitness testimony is, of course, the least reliable form of evidence, and many more of the fantastical aspects of the description can be dismissed, as again, the remains we have available for study today prove it was a basking shark. Some traits on the bones of the beast we have features unique to basking sharks. Also back then, the average person could not really look up what a decomposing basking shark looks like, and to them one might very well resemble a sea serpent. And, as you'll see in some more of these cases, basking sharks tend to fool people a lot. And let's just assume the spikes were actually glowing on the back, and ask how. Well, giving the benefit of the doubt, they said they only did it in the dark, so I'd say it was an optical illusion, a wet carcass reflecting the moonlight. Seems like a good answer to me. It's hard to find information about this one. This one is very tricky to research. Reliable information seems almost non-existent from what I could find. But I think I can deduce what it is. Look at the body shape. Look at the head shape. Look at the legs. It's a basking shark. The dorsal fin, the tail, the size, the head shape all fit. It's the legs that throw people, but first let's get some context here. From what I can gather about the backstory of this thing, people chased and shot it with muskets until it died and drifted ashore. Or they chased it ashore, maybe? Maybe. The newspaper from the time I looked at is clipped really weird, and I don't know if the article I was reading is related to the picture. So let's assume it was, and that's how the wonderful fish came to be on the shore and examined by gawkers. It washed ashore on Moose Island, Maine, at the border of Maine, basically where the US-Canada border is. Like, seriously, it's almost on the line. Now, how do I know it's a basking shark? Well, again, look at the body shape, but the legs can also be explained. They're just the shark's freakishly long claspers. Like, seriously, I've seen a picture of these claspers compared to a human. Good lord, it's scary. And they look like legs. I'm not putting it on screen so you can sleep tonight. Let me just say you better hope you're never in the water with a basking shark that thinks you're a good potential mate. Be like that one episode of The Simpsons involving the panda that traumatized us all. I mean, just look at it for a moment anyway. You can just tell. From the shape of the head or the dorsal fin, the mouth, even the nose shape has the same little indent or ridge, I'm not sure exactly what you'd call it, that basking sharks do. It's the exact same. All modern investigations and scientists have reached the same conclusion. It's just a shark. A whale shark, I suppose, might also be possible, but as no remains exist anymore, a basking shark is the more likely candidate based on the drawing, and I'd agree. Again, just going off the illustration and comparing it to a basking shark, it looks way more like one than a whale shark. And basking sharks do exist in that area of the world. To me, a basking shark is what it looks like, especially with the nose and head shape. But I'll admit either could be possible. Either way, that's all the wonderful fish ever was. Just a shark. Almost certainly a basking shark. No Spino. Washing ashore, not in St. Augustine. The St. Augustine monster washed up in Florida, near St. Augustine, but not there. It washed up in Anastasia in 1896, and is possibly the most famous globster to ever wash up in the United States. This thing caused a huge sensation when it washed up. So, we have a lot to go over with this one. This case also clearly shows how eyewitness accounts and drawings can be very misleading. You'll see why. First, the full backstory of this sea monster. She washed up and was first sighted on the evening of November 30th, 1896. Two boys discovered this rotting, fleshy mass half buried in the sand, having sunk under its own weight. The two went to St. Augustine the same day to report what they'd found, believing it to be the remains of a whale. Founder of the St. Augustine Historical Society and Institute of Science, Dr. DeWitt Webb came out to investigate the carcass, and was the only person of academic science to see the remains in situ. He theorized the remains were of a very mutilated animal in advanced stages of decomposition. The carcass he investigated was pale pink, almost white, and composed of a rubbery substance that had a hard consistency. It was around 18 feet long and 7 feet wide. Webb estimated its weight at nearly 5 tons and believed, after his initial investigation, that it was the remains of a 4 to 5, maybe even 7 armed octopus. Under this giant octopus theory, the species that the carcass was thought to represent later went on to be named Octopus giganteus, meaning giant octopus. Dr. George Grant, someone not of academic science, wrote the following account and description. Quote, "The head is as large as an ordinary flour barrel, and has the same shape as a sea lion head. The neck, if the creature may be said to have a neck, is of the same diameter as the body. The mouth is on the underside of the head, and is protected by 2 tentacle tubes about 8 inches in diameter and about 30 feet long. These tubes resemble an elephant's trunk and obviously were used to clutch in a sucker-like fashion any object within their reach. Another tube or tentacle of the same dimension stands out of the top of the head. 2 others, one on each side, protrude from beyond the monster's neck and extend fully 15 feet along the body and beyond the tail. The tail, which is separated and jagged with cutting points for several feet, is flanked with 2 more tentacles of the same dimensions as the others and 30 feet long. The eyes are under the back of the mouth instead of over it. This specimen is so badly cut up by sharks and sawfish that only the stumps of the tentacles remain, but pieces of them were found strewn for some distance on the beach, showing that the animal had a fierce battle with its foes before it was disabled and beached by the surf." Unquote. This version definitely added some liberties to the story. The carcass was eventually pulled back out to sea by the tide, but it floated back to shore on the next tide at Crescent Beach, 2 miles south of the original place it washed up. It continued to be a sensation, and investigation into the identity of the mass continued. Professor Addison Emberley Verrill of Yale, the man who basically knew more about cephalopods than anyone else in his day, first suggested that the remains could be a giant squid, but he quickly changed his mind. He eventually was able to study samples sent to him by Webb, and he concluded that the creature could not be an octopus. He added to his conclusion that the carcass was merely the upper part of the head of a sperm whale, detached from the skull and jaw. So that's it. That's what all this sensation was about. It was never the Kraken. It was just whale blubber. Webb decided that the carcass should be moved before it was lost to the sea forever. Using 6 horses and strong tackle, they moved it several miles inland. There it continued to be visited by hundreds of people, but what ultimately happened to it remains unknown. If I had to guess, I'd say it was just left there until it rotted away completely. But no one knows for sure what actually ended up happening to the carcass. For decades, photos of the carcass were lost, but were recovered almost a century after the event in 1993, and because of that, we, and you, can actually see some of the real photos of the carcass. I'll show you one right now that has a really good sense of scale to it. The same year that the movie The Lost World, a classic film featuring adventurers finding living dinosaurs in South America, released and stunned audiences, something many thought might have been a dinosaur or other prehistoric animal washed ashore on Moores Beach. Oh boy, let's break this one down because, yeah. Why do people always go for something being a dinosaur or a plesiosaur, even before the Loch Ness Monster just, stole all that thunder? The Moores Beach monster washed up in 1925 on what is now known as Natural Bridges State Beach in California. This dolphin-looking thing confused people. Like, really confused them, and all kinds of theories began going around, including one that continues to be spread to this day, that the corpse was that of a plesiosaur, either one frozen or otherwise preserved since the KT mass extinction, or proof that they survived until much more recent times. Well, no, for many reasons, even if somehow it was frozen for 66 million years. Even frozen bodies only a few hundred years old are not in any kind of pristine condition, like this thing seems to be. So even if it was frozen for 65 million years, I can imagine what state it would be in. Just look up pictures of the people buried by the Franklin expedition. They've only been down there for like 200 years, and they're preserved, but they don't look like they died yesterday, like this thing pretty much does. Also, for an even bigger reason, this thing looks nothing like a plesiosaur. It's clearly a mammal. Also, the corpse was very long and snake-like. Again, not sounding like a plesiosaur at all. As you can see, many photos were taken of the odd animal, and descriptions of it included it having a duck-like beak and serpentine body. Yeah, it really sounds like a plesiosaur now. Other reports also said it had a fish-like tail as well. Also, some people reported that it had legs, but I have no idea what those are supposed to be. They aren't visible in any photos. Some reports, though, went on to say that the legs resembled that of an elephant and were complete with toenails, and that the carcass even had feathers, though none are visible in the photos either. The only real consistent details that are supported by the photos are the small eyes, the long beak, and the serpentine body. Any of you still want to die on the "it's a plesiosaur" hill? Well, I'm about to ruin your day if you are, because we not only have the skull of this animal preserved on display for the public and available for study today, but we also know exactly what the animal is. Modern and past scientists, some of those past scientists even saw the animal on site and immediately identified it, agree that it is, drumroll somebody, a deceased, decomposing Baird's beak whale. A dolphin-looking whale that is very rarely seen, and that gets up to 43 feet long. They have a serpentine body, like the one the monster had, and the long beak. Again, the skull of the animal was also saved, preserved, studied, and removes any doubt that the creature was anything other than a Baird's beaked whale. Any marine biologist will look at it and tell you it's a Baird's beaked whale. Also, if that wasn't enough for you plesiosaur components, the animal had no teeth and a beak. All plesiosaurs have teeth and did not have a beak. And if you're somehow still on the plesiosaur hill, look at the skull of the monster, then look at the skull of the plesiosaur, and then look at the skull of a Baird's beaked whale. That will say it all. And again, marine biologists unanimously say it's a whale skull. I'm sorry I have to keep saying it, but some people I've seen really want to die on this hill. They will fight you to extreme limits, so I've just got to get the point across. A similar incident to this one also happened a few years earlier in 1920, also in Santa Cruz, but it did not gain the sensationalism that this one did. In that incident, the corpse that washed up was in much better condition and also a Baird's beaked whale. The image that goes with this one is a classic internet picture. I remember seeing it when I was a really young kid and I thought it was a movie monster. I specifically remember I was looking at pictures of graboids and other monsters from the Tremors series, so it was probably around 2009 when I first saw this picture. It's a classic picture for a good reason. It definitely grabs your attention. This very decayed, large, monster-looking corpse with a serpentine body, rotten flesh hanging off, and teeth bared in a final snarl was found on a beach in Sakhalin Island. Shocking, I know, with a name like the Sakhalin sea wolf. The bones and teeth were quickly determined by scientists to be not from a fish or any kind of crocodile or alligator. The skull resembled a canine, and the rear resembled a fish. Well, despite the well-known legacy of the image and this strange mix-up of features we're dealing with, the answer is not nearly as exciting as a hybrid sea monster made in the lab, which I actually think was a conspiracy theory. Let me tell you what it really was. Further study by scientists proved that this animal was just a decayed beluga whale. The shape of the jaws feature a formation seen on those animals. Like with all these globsters, this case clearly shows that when something is severely decayed, it looks like something completely different than it would have when alive. All you need to do to ID this one is just look up the jaw structure of a beluga whale, and you'll see the exact same little indent on the upper jaw you see in the upper jaw in the picture of this globster's open mouth. Ah, that's a whale. Like, look. Whale. That's all that needs to be said. It was a whale. A bride's whale specifically, but a whale. Not much to discuss here. Marine biologists who examined the carcass at the time all agreed it was just a decomposing bride's whale, with the supposed tusks you see on the monster just being the bottom parts of the jaw you see in the skeletal image on screen now. That's all it is. It's just a whale. Oh boy, I've been looking forward to this next one. It's not only one of my favorites, it should also be a familiar face. We've seen this one before, way back in the Loch Ness Monster documentary. This is arguably the most famous dead animal corpse ever found in the ocean. This is one of those cases where the carcass doesn't resemble a known animal, and people constantly think something fantastical instead of something that's a little bit more grounded in reality. People just claim that this is proof of unknown sea animals or extinct animals without anything to back it up. So take a look at the picture. Yeah. So, where was it found? What's the story? And what is it? Well, unlike the last one, we have plenty to go through here. A Japanese fishing trawler, the Zuiyo-Maru, plucked this thing out of the water off New Zealand after snagging it in a net that was over 980 feet deep in the ocean. When they hauled the net up, this massive carcass was revealed to be tangled in with the rest of the catch. The crew immediately all thought they'd snagged the remains of an unknown animal species from the depths of the ocean. That or a big turtle with no shell. The carcass was in advanced stages of decomposition, but the flesh and muscles were decently intact, enough to hold it together suspended above the deck. Its internal organs were all gone, and its body was hollowed out and apparently reeked. It also had 4 reddish-colored fins and a 1.5 meter, or nearly 5 feet, long neck. Fearing the thing, this giant, rotting, stinking corpse, would contaminate their entire catch, the captain, Akira Tanaka, ordered it dumped overboard despite the excitement of the crew at possibly finding an unknown animal species or the biological significance of such a find. But samples were collected and photos were taken before this was done. The incident got widespread attention, started a plesiosaur craze, and the fishing company ordered all of their boats to try and relocate the carcass, but it was never found again. The ocean is a big place after all. This story sounds like the opening of a Godzilla movie. Now, something I addressed in the Loch Ness Monster documentary that I have to readdress here is this. No, this thing was not a plesiosaur. People love to say that this thing was a plesiosaur. Admittedly, it does kind of look like one. So many people try to claim that this is a late surviving plesiosaur. It's kind of wild, actually. That'd be really cool, but no, it's not. Now look, I'm a prehistoric animal fanatic. My avatar in these videos is literally a Spinosaurus. I'd love it if plesiosaurs were still around post-KPG, or simply KT as I referred to it earlier, extinction. But they're not. Even though scientists at the time first described the carcass as not a fish, whale, or any other mammal, we thankfully know what it was. You see, before they dumped it overboard, the Zuiyo-Maru's crew collected not just photographic evidence, multiple photos were taken from several angles around the entire specimen for thorough documentation, and sketches of it were also drawn, but also samples from the animal, including from its skeleton, skin, and fins, were collected for further study by experts back in Japan. Measurements were also taken of the animal before it was dumped overboard, and it was about 10 meters, or roughly 32 feet long, and weighed 4,000 pounds, give or take. And with all that data, we know exactly what the animal is. It's something very familiar and not so prehistoric. Look, if plesiosaurs were still alive, we would know. Not necessarily because of the fossil record, but they breathe air. They'd have to surface all the time, like dolphins or whales. It would be impossible for us to have never seen them. I get that the ocean is huge, but even sometimes the most elusive animals that breathe air still get spotted. Sometimes 50 years goes by between sightings, but they do get seen. The lack of plesiosaurs popping up to breathe air today is very telling. The oceans have been free of them for 66 million years, since the Cretaceous. So what was the carcass? A basking shark. The amino acids from the samples collected by the crew prove it. Other marine biologists also agreed. Another reason it's not a plesiosaur, far too vertebrae in the neck, even for a short-necked plesiosaur. The carcass also perfectly matched the body dimensions you'd expect to find on a large basking shark. The reason that it looks like a plesiosaur is that it's so decayed. The bottom jaw has either completely fallen off or is actually still hanging around in the mess in its chest. It looks like it might be if you look closely. But the dorsal fin and other shark-like traits, like the gill area, do fall off very quickly after death and will be long gone by this point of decomposition. Again, resulting in a plesiosaur-like look. But the corpse in this advanced of a state of decay, how it looked when alive would have been very different to how it looked when it was found. The head shape and size also do not match any known plesiosaur skulls. Despite that not so incredible explanation, this story does remain a popular legend today and has left an impact on pop culture. In fact, an incident inspired by this story was even considered to be the opening scene for the Lost World Jurassic Park before it got reworked into the Compsognathus attack we all know opens the movie and the final film we have today. We've covered the really famous ones, so these next ones are going to go by a little bit quicker, but this is also one that is still relatively famous, so let's talk about it. Our boy Trunko. Trunko is the name for this blobby, lumpy, hairy white carcass that washed up on a beach in Margate, South Africa on the 25th of October 1924. It was initially described as a fish like a polar bear and was reportedly seen viciously fighting for its life against two killer whales for hours, using its tail to attack them with powerful strikes, lifting itself out of the water by 20 feet for each attack. Finally, it seemed to lose, and shortly afterward washed ashore and laid there for about 10 days. But no scientists or anyone with academic knowledge on marine animals ever arrived to investigate the carcass. It was described by eyewitnesses as an animal covered in thick fuzzy white fur and having a trunk like an elephant. Some also reportedly said that its tail resembled a lobster's. No samples were taken, it wasn't properly measured or weighed, but in this picture you can at least see something when it comes to its scale since there's a person next to it. Speaking of pictures, the carcass was, in fact, so poorly documented and studied that no pictures were thought to exist of it until around 80 years later, when this one that you see and 3 others were rediscovered. These photos actually showed us that the fur was actually connective tissue fibers and not fur at all. Okay, so it had no fur. But what was Trunko? Well, paleontologist Darren Nish said this on the matter. The photos show that it was the rotting carcass of a large vertebrate, most likely a whale. The idea that this was really the body of a white-furred, trunked sea monster stems from naivete about the appearance of rotting animal carcasses. The photos are somewhat ambiguous, but the enormous bulk of the carcass, the large amount of what looks to be frayed, badly decayed collagen, and the presence of what seems to be a mostly obscured internal skeletal framework suggest that this is another globster, a rotting mass of whale tissue. Whales are common in that region, and the decaying blubber of one might have made for an appetizing meal or just a fun toy for some killer whales to amuse themselves with for a while. Other scientists have suggested a basking shark or whale shark as being a candidate as well, a basking shark in particular because, as we've covered, the bottom jaw and gills fall off quickly, so that could result in the neck being misidentified as a trunk, but I'll agree that, no matter which of these 3 it was, Trunko is the corpse, or part of one, of a known animal and not a representation of a completely unknown genus of marine mammal. The real identity of which animal it was will likely never be confirmed, again due to the poor documentation and study of the carcass, but without extraordinary evidence, it's going to be hard to make an extraordinary claim. Unless something more comes out of this, like another picture, I'll take the dead whale piece explanation put forth by people much more knowledgeable in the field of marine animals than I am. Alright, this one starts with what is basically a horror story, so strap in for a campfire tale. In September 2009, a group of 5 teenagers between 14 and 16 years old were playing in a cave in Panama. While they were playing in the cave, this thing, a creature, started stalking towards them from out of the darkness, creeping along the stream coming out of the deeper sections of the cave. When they noticed it slowly creeping closer, they were terrified and this strange pale thing crawling towards them, and they attacked it with sticks and rocks and clubbed it over and over until it was dead, and then they threw it back into the same pool of water that was flowing out of the cave. Days later, they returned to the site, taking photos of the corpse, which is where the golem-like thing you see on screen comes from. So what happened? What is this thing, this knockoff skinwalker? As it turns out, the identity is well known. 4 days after the pictures were shared with the media, the corpse was recovered and studied by the National Environmental Authority of Panama. They conducted a biopsy on the corpse and determined that it was a sloth. Yeah, that's right. This vicious cave monster was a slow-moving male-throated brown sloth. Male-throated brown sloth. Well, that's a mispronounce. It's male brown-throated sloth. It's a very common animal you can find in the area. The theory that they put forth was that it had been dead during the whole encounter. It was merely caught in a current in the cave pool, moving towards the boys via the current and giving the illusion of being alive. Post-mortem bloating also contributed to the odd, swollen look of the body, and it had lost all its fur after death. Or maybe it lost all its fur when it was still alive due to some disease. You pick. Once it was identified, the corpse was buried. It's the blob. Like, seriously, this thing looks like it wants to eat you. I don't know why, but the thing in this picture just feels threatening. Thank goodness it was just a dead pile of blob. This globster, like basically all of these, was originally unidentified due to how severe the decomposition state was when it was discovered. It was found washed up on a beach in New Zealand in 1965. Nice to know rotting corpses washing up still mystify people like they did 150 years before this. There isn't much of a dramatic story to go with this one, though, like some of those early globsters from the 19th century or the early 20th century. It was identified very quickly as, quote, a very dead, very smelly whale. The 1990s, apparently, were just the time for unexpected loud underwater noises that sounded like gigantic living animals. These aren't globsters, they're just noises, roar-like sounds, but people often claim they're examples of giant, unknown ocean animals. So, since sea monsters and things that might be them are technically the topic of the video, we're going to look at these too and entertain some of the ideas and find out what the truth is. We're going to look at 4 of them now, and even though these aren't globsters, they'll just be a fun thing to throw in here at the end. I'll play a snippet of each of them at their original speed as well. Some of these go on for like 10 minutes, so I'm only going to be playing parts of them and not the full thing. But I want you to hear how they originally sounded instead of the much more sped up versions that people often hear or play when talking about these. Once we listen to them, I'll go through and explain what they really were in the order that they played. If you've been around my channel for a minute, you'll recognize some of these because I use them as ambience a lot. Particularly this first one. Okay, let's start with the first one. Julia. Julia is what sounds like an ocean creature's roar. It was recorded on March 1st, 1999. I just gotta say, can you imagine your job being to listen to the hydrophones? It's early morning, you're barely awake, and suddenly that blares through your headset? Talk about frightening. So what made this roar? What was Julia? Well, first, the location it originated from was not narrowed down that much. Like, half the Antarctic coast was all listed as an area it might have originated from, specifically somewhere between the region of the Bansfield Straits and Cape Andre. Good luck narrowing that down. Julia was most likely the sound of a large iceberg running itself into the ground off the coast. While Julia does sound like the roar of a giant sea creature, and heck, I use it for creepy ambience all the time in videos, I'm not an expert into what hydrophones are or the sounds that they record, or what sounds the ocean makes. So if the experts say it was most likely an iceberg running aground, then that's what it most likely was. I'm not going to be the guy who claims it's something else other than what the experts say just because I think it sounds like something different without having the knowledge of hydrophone sounds to back my point up. Though it sounds like a roar, Julia was most likely an iceberg running aground somewhere off the Antarctic coast. But it would be really cool if it was some giant gargantuan sea creature. How's that not an awesome thing to imagine? The next one I played was a portion of the 7-minute sound called Slow Down. This roar-like noise is possibly my favorite underwater noise ever, the sped-up version anyway. At original speed, it's probably Julia. Slow Down, recorded in 1997, is named as such because the sound decreased in frequency over a period of 7 minutes. So what slowed down? What was slow down? Why does it sound like a giant monster moving and roaring? Well, it was also an iceberg. A particularly large iceberg, most likely, that became grounded somewhere in Antarctica. The sound matches frequencies caused by friction, and scientists have concluded that the most likely explanation for slowdown is that the noise was created by a very large iceberg becoming grounded. However, one thing that is odd about slowdown, it repeats. It's been recorded several times since it was originally heard in 1997. So, giant sea creature might still be on the table. Fingers crossed. On that ominous note, let's move on to Upsweep. The sped-up version sounds like a whistle or alarm almost, and while the original almost sounds like the screams of the damned, which is nice. Upsweep, like Slowdown, also repeats. It's seasonal and has been heard every year since it was first picked up in NOAA's Equatorial Autonomous Hydrophones in 1991. The sound can be heard on hydrophones throughout the Pacific Ocean, and it reaches its peaks in frequency in autumn and spring. But the reason for this is unknown. The sound has also declined in volume, but it can still be heard on hydrophones today. The source is unidentified, but its location has been pinpointed to a region around 45 degrees south, 140 degrees west in the Pacific Ocean. The only real theory scientists and NOAA researchers have is that the noise is underwater volcano activity that has been ongoing since 1991, but to this day, no one truly knows what upsweep is. But considering it never moves, I feel pretty confident in saying it's not a sea monster. Maybe one day we can go there and send an ROV or other submersible down and have a look. Our final noise of the day is definitely the most famous, the bloop. You've probably heard the story. The noise was so loud it was heard on hydrophones more than 3,000 miles apart. Fun fact, I've heard Julia at its original speed be used as the bloop before by some people. Whoops. So what was the bloop, and when was it heard? Bloop was heard in 1997, and after the hydrophones picked it up, the source was triangulated to a remote point in the South Pacific Ocean, west of the southern tip of South America. The sound was heard more than once and, quote, rises rapidly in frequency over about 1 minute and was of sufficient amplitude to be heard on multiple sensors at a range of over 3,100 miles. So, Godzilla or something else, you're asking yourself. Admittedly, the frequency and audio profile of bloop resembles a living creature. Oh boy, it's Zuiyo-Maru's daddy, or mommy. Another thing that made the detail of it resembling a living creature noteworthy was because it would have had to have been several times larger than the largest creature living ever, the blue whale. Well, once again, I'm no expert and don't claim to be, but there is no evidence Bloop was a giant sea creature, as awesome as that would be. There's no extraordinary evidence for this extraordinary claim. Plus, if it was alive, it would have been heard again. Like, if it's an animal that's that loud, it would have been picked up again. NOAA scientists have attributed the sound to being from a large ice quake. Other loud ice quakes result in noises very similar to Bloop. If icebergs were the origin of the noise, the exact location of them is unclear. We just have a general region of the ocean for a reference. You know, I think these cases embody the mystery of the ocean. We have this curiosity about us, about what unknowns live in it. And these cases tease us with those unknowns finally becoming known. Plus, they make us wonder and imagine what these unknown corpses are, or what the sources of these unknown sounds are. And even when the answers are revealed, the what if and mysteries in the stories still captivate us and make our minds wonder. It's just something that makes us human. And hey, I'm all for creativity. So if someone makes a horror movie about the Stronsay Beast terrorizing 19th century Scotland before it's killed and its corpse washes ashore, I'll be there opening night. But in all seriousness, it just comes down to the mystery. These things tease us with the mystery of our world and the oceans revealing themselves, and that's very cool. One day, maybe something truly baffling will wash ashore somewhere. Until then, though, like and subscribe if you enjoyed and you want to see more videos like this, and check out my deep dive into the full history of the Loch Ness Monster and my other documentaries. If there's enough interest, I might do a follow-up and cover more globsters and other sea monster sightings, such as the particularly intriguing Glacier Island creature, or other well-known globsters and sea monsters like the 60-foot crocodile-like creature seen by German submarine SMU-28. I was also originally going to cover the HMS Daedalus Sea Serpent story in this video. Scripted the whole section out, but I cut it for time. But it could definitely be added into a follow-up. Let me know if you're interested. And most importantly, I just hope you enjoyed. I really do. Today that I was going to record this, I just got smacked with this wave of no motivation. But I powered through and I recorded this anyway because this topic really does excite me. And I just hope you enjoyed it. Like, at the end of the day, that's what's important. I also have a new microphone on the way finally, so hopefully in the next video and future ones, the audio will finally be a little bit better. Until the next video, have a good one, everyone. Please tell me if you enjoyed. I really hope you did. And thank you for watching.